It's literally impossible for new brands to become a household name today. Advertising has become the single greatest, most consistent source of friction in our lives. You click on a video and you're excited to watch it come up, and boom, you instead get to watch a 15-second commercial about Diet Coke. And that people off. Instead of spending all your money putting all these resources interrupting people, you should be identifying friction points they have and alleviating them. The expectations and the experience should be exactly the same.
I don't know about you, but I feel like every time I buy something now, I'm then being approached with some sort of subscription.
Yeah, I refer to this as the Californication of marketing. Where it's basically Silicon Valley got it in their minds that subscription businesses were really valuable businesses. To be honest, it's maddening.
Clearly, this is a topic you're incredibly passionate about dedicating your life to. What's your bigger mission? What's your personal mission?
I mean, this is it.
Paul, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Very excited about today's conversation. I think it's going to be very, very insightful for the audience. We're going to be talking about, obviously, the very broad topic of marketing, advertising, and I'm really looking forward to learning from you. So jumping straight into it, you've been quite vocal about the way perhaps traditional advertising has been failing. What's gone wrong?
Yeah, I mean, maybe if we take a step back and one of the bigger focus areas, both of my own personal thought leadership and the book that I wrote, and then also for the company Prompt, one of our primary areas of emphasis is on this idea of friction in whether it's your consumer, or your customer, or the general public, friction in their experience with companies. And we can talk about how and why, but traditional advertising has become one of the most prominent and consistent sources of friction in those experiences people have with companies. But there are others. And we view our job as Prompt. We call ourselves a frictionless agency. And that means that our job is really to identify the friction points that your stakeholders have with your company or your brand, and then help you figure out, is this a friction point that we need to alleviate? Is it a commercial or an operational problem that we need to solve? Or is it a communication or a marketing problem? And the reason why those two things are kind of the solve here is rooted in the definition of friction, which for us, the definition of friction is essentially when your experience with a company is not the same as what your expectations of that experience were. So we know from neuroscience that the brain makes anywhere between 30 and 35,000 micro decisions a day, and that most of those decisions are happening subconsciously. And even the ones that we're making consciously, they're all preceded by some expectation of what's going to happen. You pick up a hamburger, you have an expectation of what it's going to taste like, what it's going to feel like, what's going to be in it, etc. It doesn't matter what the thing is that you're doing throughout your day. It's preceded by some expectation. And if the experience then is different from the expectation, we call that a friction point. And the obvious way of thinking about it would be if the expectations are not met, well, then obviously there's a friction point there. But the opposite is also true, which is if you're expecting something, let's just stick with hamburgers for whatever reason that popped into my head. Maybe it's lunchtime and I'm hungry here. You pick up a hamburger and you expect that it's going to be just a fine kind of, regular hamburger based on the place you got it. And it ends up being amazing. It is the best hamburger you've ever had. Well, when people hear that, they're like, well, great, you're exceeding expectations. That's positive, right? In our views, that's actually still bad, because if everybody knew how good your hamburgers were, you'd have more customers, right? It's still a friction point. So the expectations and the experience should be exactly the same. That should be frictionless. And so that's why we're a frictionless agency, is our business is based around eliminating the friction between people's expectations of your company and the experiences they have with your company. Now, one of the research projects that we actually just completed this year, um, we're looking at friction for something like 125 of the top companies in the United States. And we've broken it up by sector, and so there's automotive, and there's pharmaceutical, and there's media and entertainment, there's food and beverage, et cetera. And we said which companies have the most friction. This includes with their employees, right? So they can have friction with their employees, or their employees' expectations are not being met. This includes their customers, which might be an end consumer, or it might be a retailer, or whoever. This includes with the general public, all of their stakeholders. Who has the most friction? And one of the most, and perhaps the only, clear data point that cuts across all industries is the companies with the most consistent friction are the companies that also have the highest unaided advertising awareness. So, what does that mean? It means that the more likely it is that people have seen ads from this company, the more likely it is that they are disappointed by the company, right? That they feel friction with the company. And this is because advertising has become the single greatest, most consistent source of friction in our lives. So you go to YouTube, you click on a video, and it's a highlight reel of your favorite sports team, and you're excited to watch it come up, and boom, you instead get to watch a 15-second commercial about Diet Coke. Your expectation was not to watch a 15-second commercial about Diet Coke. Your expectation was to see a highlight reel. And instead, you're experiencing a 15-second commercial about Diet Coke. And that pisses people off. Why on earth are we spending billions of dollars a year to piss people off? Right. And this is at the center of the modern advertising industrial complex, is this idea that disruption, literally disrupting, interrupting people and forcing them to do something they don't want to do, is the way to build businesses. And we fundamentally disagree with that. And so I'll keep picking on Diet Coke here as I give the sort of alternative, which is there anybody in America that doesn't know what Diet Coke is? Right? Like, can we just agree that almost everybody in America knows what Diet Coke is? And so spending $50 million a year reminding people that there's Diet Coke out there is probably not a great use of resources. And that if instead, over the last 10 years, they'd spent $50 million a year just solving problems for people, that we probably would be more loyal to them. And heck, they might have even not been surpassed by Dr. Pepper in the last couple of years if that was the case, right? And so this is the overall this is the main, the crux of the argument here, David, is instead of spending all your money and putting all these resources interrupting people, you should be identifying friction points they have and alleviating them. And that if you do that, people will be more loyal customers.
And when in the example of Diet Coke, I know it's just sort of a crude example to explain the point, but you said there perhaps better they invest that, say, the $50 million in solving people's problems. Are you suggesting that's them spending that money on charitable issues, societal issues, or is it improving the product and addressing perhaps problems that way?
It's all of the above.
Can you
So
okay.
certainly you could do that through charity. I'm not one of these people who thinks that charity is necessarily the solution to things. I tend to believe that the capitalist system is sort of best suited for solving problems. But what that would look like would be, okay, Diet Coke is, one of its highest consumption areas is going to be in a major metropolitan city where there's food deserts. And, people are sure they're drinking Diet Coke, but they also don't have access to, high quality food. And we're going to help address that problem. And that doesn't mean we're just going to give money to feed America. It means that we, as a corporation with distribution, right, where we have trucks going into these cities, the refrigerated trucks and we're gonna come up with a solution that partners with a different company and to bring food into these areas where people are already drinking Diet Coke, and it's going to be brought to you by Diet Coke, and you think about that's where advertising started. It was solving problems brought to you by the advertiser. That's what a soap opera was, right? Was you had primarily housewives in that era staying home, bored in the middle of the day. Nothing was on television. So Procter and Gamble said, "All right, we'll entertain you." And they just put entertainment on the television and then said, "Brought to you by, is it Dial? Ivory? Ivory. At this point, we've forgotten. But, it was a soap opera. And so it's a great example of they're just solving a problem and brought to you by. So that's one direction. The other direction, which you referenced, would be reallocating resources into improving the product. And this is what Apple, although they're well known for that 1984 Super Bowl commercial, they did very little advertising, right? The product advertised itself. They put all their resources into producing a perfect product. And, so you think about over the last 20 years, you can actually look at this. If you look at the SEC reports from the top publicly traded companies, there's been a dramatic decrease in how much of their resources go into R&D that is almost perfectly offset by increasing resources in advertising and promotion. So they basically have decided, instead of, taking the gamble of investing in a better product, we're just going to over advertise the existing product. And, of course, in the near term, if you're somebody who is being held accountable by the street, quarterly performance, et cetera, over one quarter, you'll probably generate better returns by putting those resources into advertising than investing them into R&D. But at a certain point, all those quarters add up and your product hasn't really been innovated in a really long time. Or that's how you end up with these silly iterations like razor blades that now have 6 blades on them, and when everybody knows 2 or 3 was probably enough. Where it's not really innovating, not really improving the product or the experience. It's sort of, faking it.
Are you saying there's no place for this type of advertising anymore, or are you saying it should be done a lot less?
What I'm saying is you should do something worth talking about first, then advertise about the thing you did. It's sort of like earning the right to advertise. And so if you've done something interesting and something that people are willing to talk about, so I'll use an example it's one of my favorite case studies from our agency. And the client in this case was Bayer Aspirin. And the brief from the client was, we want people who have suffered a heart attack, that they should know that they should be taking an aspirin a day to decrease the likelihood of another cardiac event, right? And there are 2 agencies in the mix. I'm not going to call out the other ones, one of the big traditional agencies. And they asked us both to come up with their ideas. And this agency came in and, they said something to the effect of, listen to the rhythm of your heart. We'll make a TV commercial about it. It'll be a big ad campaign. And it kind of is what it is. Our team came in and said, did you know the actual rhythm of your heartbeat changes after a heart attack? And we think that we can do something really interesting here because Leslie Odom Jr., star of Hamilton, his father-in-law is a heart attack survivor. We called him and asked if he'd be willing to let us record his heartbeat. And he said yes. So we're going to record, Stuart's his name. We're going to record Stuart's post-heart attack heartbeat. And we're going to work with Leslie, his son-in-law, to write an original song set to that beat. Right? Okay. At this point, it's like, this sounds pretty interesting. This is a cool idea, right? But what do you do with that? Okay, now there's a whole campaign that comes out around this. It's still a marketing campaign where you've got Leslie and his wife performing the song. They're delivering it as a gift to their father for Father's Day. There's a whole program around it, partnering with Spotify to get the playlist out there. And when you hear the song, it's incredibly moving. It's this is real emotion. The man almost died. His daughter and son-in-law are thankful that he's still with them. And they've written a song set to the beat of his heart, to say, thank you, we love you. And it's incredibly emotional. And, you take that and you put that out in the right channels. And now there were millions of people talking about this, right? You didn't have to pay for that. You had to pay to make it, but you didn't have to pay for the people to talk about it. But you've now done something that's interesting enough that you can advertise about what you've done, right? So you can now say, all right, let's buy some media to make sure more people are aware of this really interesting thing that we did.
Mm.
Let me give you a flip side of that example would be Cadillac launched one of their electric vehicles. It's like called the Lyric, right? So we're sticking in the music, realm here. And they did a brilliant, beautifully done TV commercial where they worked with this famous what are the guys called where they conduct the orchestra? I guess it's a conductor, right? An orchestra conductor.
Mm.
And he
Mm.
conducts this sort of intense, high energy orchestra in this TV commercial. And they do this brilliant performance, and the whole thing is cut down into a 30-second TV spot. But the concert never happened. They didn't even do a concert. It's like,
Mm.
why did you spend all that money getting this orchestra together in this beautiful set just to take a video of it?
Yeah.
I mean, you could come up with all the places and all the ways where if you're trying to drive a message about an American made electric vehicle, that's targeting a certain audience, whatever, like that you could perform an actual electrified orchestra, for people in real life. And that would be, if you did it well, worth talking about. But they didn't do it. They just made a TV commercial. It's just a video, So
Yeah.
anyways, that's the idea is it's not to say advertising goes away. It's to say you have to earn the right. You got to do something that's worth talking about, and then you can advertise about that thing.
That when you say that, it sounds so simple, but that's a real paradigm shifter. Certainly for me, hearing that. And if a company's adopting that approach, that's going to actually push you to do something great, to innovate, to do something great for the community. It's going to drive so many great things within the business.
Well, and that's the thing is it really should be a mentality shift that goes way beyond just advertising and promotion, right? If you think about it, we think of it through this lens of alleviating friction and earning your growth, right? Because what is advertising? It's trying to buy growth. And what we're saying is instead you should earn your growth. And so that comes through your sales force, that comes through your customer service team, that comes through your R&D team, HR, you name it. If you embody and really sort of embrace this idea of earning loyalty, new customers, earning the right to grow this business from every one of your stakeholders, it will happen, right? And you don't have to buy it. You don't have to kind of cheat with a bunch of YouTube ads, right? You can earn it. And then, sure, you can let people know what you're doing. And they'll be a lot more open to it because of the things that you've done.
And let me ask you, so companies, some have got huge marketing teams. In your experience, do these teams and these marketing professionals around the world have this skill set, this mindset? How do we, if I'm an executive leading a company, how am I ensuring my marketing team are thinking like this?
Well, so I mean, this is a big question. It's evolving a lot just in the last 2 or 3 years, which is we're sort of opening a door now that's talking about brand marketing versus performance marketing. Which let's put that on the table, but give me 1 second. We'll come back to it. There's also a question of like how marketing is measured and what it's expected to contribute to the organization. And historically, and this is substantiated via various polls and surveys that are done through top consultancies of CEOs and chief marketing officers, et cetera. Historically, it was a lot more things. It was product strategy, it was growth strategy, it was corporate positioning, brand building, something sort of like the heart of the company, the reason to believe. There were all these different things that were associated with what marketing was being measured on. And in the last couple of years, most corporate leadership has basically said, all right, enough. You're going to be measured on growing revenue, period.
Mm.
And so we've seen a litany now of companies that have actually eliminated the chief marketing officer position, or
Mm.
restructured that role to report into a chief growth officer or a chief revenue officer. And so marketing, whether they have a CMO or not, in many cases is now being treated purely as a growth function. And I think that there's a number of things that are responsible for that. One is going to be just the overall economic climate, and the real need to drive growth. Another is going to be the fact that the digital platforms like Meta and Google have been able to create these near term measurable sales engines where that didn't exist before. So you had to kind of take more of a leap of faith on your marketing efforts in the past. Um, and I think there's probably a couple of other things, that are responsible there. But what, the impact has been is that marketers are now becoming very, very lower funnel focused. And so what's getting lost in the middle is things that make you feel something about a product or a brand. All right. So if you're very lower funnel focused or very sales and growth oriented, revenue oriented, um, you're going to focus primarily on awareness. How many people know about my product? And then purchasing. How many people are buying my product? And everything else might be a means to an end, but you tend to skip it as much as you possibly can. And so that's where performance marketing is what really has been, I don't know, driving the discourse over the last couple of years. And you can look at how media budgets are allocated across the Fortune 500, and it's a remarkable shift over the last literally couple of years. Where,
Really?
yeah, it used to be, let's call it 4 or 5 years ago, lower funnel performance marketing would have been 5-10% of the media budget.
Yeah.
In some companies now it's 60-70%. And these are big companies spending hundreds of millions of dollars, in their media budgets. And, what that means is you ask this question, essentially, are companies suited or prepared to do this kind of work? And the answer is sort of like they used to be, right? Everybody listening to this can probably remember ad campaigns of yesteryear. And there's a different one that resonated with every single person, but there's the Clydesdales for Budweiser, or there's the man your man can smell like from Old Spice, or there's because you're worth it from L'Oreal. Like there's all kinds of ad campaigns that made an emotional connection with people historically. And so the people who did that are still out there, but they're not being measured or incentivized to do the kind of work that's going to make an emotional connection with audiences today. They're incentivized to drive near-term sales this quarter. And so that's where performance marketing comes in at the expense of investing in brand building. And, brand building was largely something that lived on traditional channels. So, television advertising, obviously, being the biggest. The examples I just gave were all TV ads. And that's where the bulk of brand building happened. And as TV has become far less effective than it used to be, because people don't watch TV ads anymore, even though for some reason people still buy them, but nobody watches them. And even when I give talks in front of rooms full of marketers, I'm like, how many of you guys have, spent money on television advertising in the last 6 months? And like more than half of the hands go up. And I say, how many of you have watched a TV ad in the last 6 months? All the hands go down. It's like this, we all know it doesn't work, but anyways, so, TV ads were where the brand building was happening, and they don't work anymore. And so, in the absence of that, and with the new pressures to drive revenue growth, everything has now gone to bottom of the funnel, Meta, Google, just try to get people to buy something today. And that means that mid funnel, brand health, which is where you feel something about a brand. This is a brand for me. This is a brand I prefer. This is a brand I would recommend to a loved one, right? That is all, it's really kind of gone out the window.
Do you think so? These companies that are bringing, you mentioned the focus on the lower funnel. So the companies are trying to make sales now, and then I don't know about you, but I feel like every time I buy something now, I'm then being approached with some sort of subscription
100%.
model.
Yes.
So perhaps people, rather than doing that mid-level marketing when they should be, they're kind of trying to do it after they've already got the customer. And maybe that's then going to create more of the friction we've talked about.
Yeah, I refer to this as the Californication of marketing. Where it's basically Silicon Valley got it in their minds that subscription businesses were really valuable businesses, and their application of venture capital then defined the atomization of consumer goods in particular, trying to basically treat them like software businesses to get software like valuations. And it to be honest, it's maddening. I mean, even you can see the same thing just in media and entertainment, right? Because what's replacing the ad supported business model is paid subscriptions, right? The New York Times was the first to really lead here. 2012 is the year when paid reader subscription surpassed ad revenue for the New York Times. So we're way ahead of the curve there. Um, and now we're in a situation where between Netflix, Spotify, there's hundreds of millions of people who are spending money every month just to be ad free, right? In whatever format, whether it's your news, your radio, your television, whatever it is. One of the only places where we still accept it is live sporting events. Why? Because we expect halftime. You're not interrupting us. We weren't expecting the basketball game to still be going on at halftime. We were expecting a break. It's okay to go ahead and say brought to you by, right, during that time, because you're not interrupting us. NFL is a different story. It's annoying. There's too many timeouts. There's too many TV breaks, right? Because we weren't expecting it. We're supposed to be watching football, not an ad for deodorant.
Well, let's move on, because there was another big area we wanted to talk about, which was your idea of shared perception. It's
Yep.
something you've talked about a lot. So what is it, and why does it matter?
Yeah. So shared perception is something that is sort of at odds with personalization. And it was historically essentially the purpose of advertising, right? Was shared perception. So you think about, we mentioned the Super Bowl just a minute ago. Super Bowl still is one of the places where it actually makes sense to advertise if you can afford it, right? For $7.5 million, people are like, how could that possibly make sense? Well, it's because everybody's actually watching the ads. And because so many people are watching the ads that you can reasonably assume everybody who matters to you, whether that's your friends, your family, your coworkers, whatever, they probably saw the same ad. And so they probably have a similar perception about the brand that ran that ad. So if you watch this TV commercial and you see a BMW zipping around and it makes you feel a certain way about people who drive that kind of car, you can reasonably assume that everybody else is going to have the same perception about people who drive that kind of car, right? And so that shared perception is where a lot of the sort of incremental value of marketing value of that media investment comes from. Now, what that's been replaced by in recent years, because there is no, outside the Super Bowl, there is no obvious mass media way of driving shared perception anymore. We don't all watch the same sitcom at 6:00 on Wednesday. And in fact, we've ran a study this year which showed it's literally impossible for new brands to become a household name today. Right. So if you look at all of the largest private companies that launched between 2015 and 2025, the most unaided awareness that any of them have gotten is 44% of America, less than half. You look at the 10 years before that, the companies that launched in 2005 to 2015, think of like Uber. Everybody knows it, right? It's something like the average is like 77%. Okay.
Wow.
Because in that period, it was still possible to reach generally all of America and to create a household name. And it no longer is because media has atomized too much. Right. And so if you can't reach everybody except for during the Super Bowl, or maybe a handful of other, exceptions, um, it's very difficult to create a shared perception unless you're being very targeted. So within this audience, not just being demographics, but people who are fans of this team, right? You can create a shared perception among fans of that team, for example. Um, but so if you consider that shared perception, while it's one of the biggest reasons to do advertising, it's almost no longer possible, right? To create a shared perception on a national basis. What it's been replaced by is data-driven personalization, right? The idea that I'm going to target you because you bought this pair of sneakers. I'm going to target you with an ad that says you should also buy this pair of jeans. And not only are the jeans going to follow you all over the internet, we're going to increasingly try to create the perception that this recommendation is specifically for you. And there's a multi-billion-dollar ad tech industry that's built just to create this, just to try to convince you this ad is just for you, right? So right person, right time, right place, personalization. Now, if this ad is just for me, then does it make me believe that my friends feel the same way about this brand? No, right? I'm the only one who sees this ad. So if I don't buy something from it, what's the incremental marketing value? Largely nothing, right?
Mm.
So either the ad gets me to buy that pair of jeans right now or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, it has failed to create any perception in my mind that my friends like that, brand of jeans, or, that successful people wear jeans like this, whatever that perception might be that you're trying to create. I don't have any lingering perception because you told me this ad was just for me because I bought those shoes.
Got it. So shared perception should be the goal of a marketing campaign.
Well, all these things have to work together, right? I'm not saying that ads shouldn't drive sales. Like they need to drive sales at a certain point. But if you put, like I said, 60 or 70% of your emphasis on driving near-term sales, then what you're doing is mortgaging the future to pay your bills today. Right. And so that eventually catches up to you. And we've seen this happen now with a lot of different companies where they have, in particular, we work primarily with large brands that are selling, they're trying to reach the next 10 million customers, not 100,000. And um, generally speaking, as they put more emphasis on near-term personalization, performance-based lower funnel, what they see is 18 to 24 months later, their sales fall off a cliff because they've sort of reached everybody they can reach with that method. And in the beginning, it's really, really, it's great. It's like it seems like sales are they're rocketing, they're measurable, that goes up every month. You can put more in and you get more out. So in the beginning, it seems like this is a godsend, and then the problem is you're building a house on sand, right? Because none of those customers feel something emotional about the product. None of them are recommending it. None of them believe that their friends think something about this brand, right? They just bought one product, and so eventually, you've either stuffed their pantry or you've sold what they're willing to buy, and it catches up to you, and that's where the decline in mid funnel brand health really kind of becomes a problem. So we say that
Yeah.
mid funnel brand health is about driving future sales. Anyways, it's not to say you can't do both or you shouldn't do both. In fact, you should. Um,
Yeah.
but the current method of putting way too much emphasis on near term lower funnel is mortgaging the future to pay your current bills.
The personalization topic is a very interesting one, and it has quite far-reaching consequences. I think you and I, when we spoke previously, we talked about that role it's played in shaping politics in particular. And you mentioned and you've spoken in detail about, in particular, Michael Bloomberg's
Yeah, yeah, poor Michael.
campaign, which I thought was a really interesting case study for this. Could you talk to us a bit
It's
about
interesting for so
what
many
happened in
reasons,
that
right?
campaign?
Because Michael is a scion of data, right? That's what Bloomberg terminals are. And he's a scion of the media world. And he's not a totally unreasonable candidate for president. General consensus is that he was at least a fine, if not a good mayor of New York. He's a very intelligent guy. He's very well connected. He's a totally reasonable candidate that should have been able to make a run. And instead, he spent $600 million in a couple of months and crashed out with nothing to show for it. It was more than Trump and Hillary had spent combined in the previous cycle. It was enough to win the national election in any other cycle. And it got him nothing. Right. And so, I mean, that was the big impetus for me writing the book, Friction Fatigue, was to say, look, if this guy, who's the owner of Bloomberg Media, you know, can't deploy a massive war chest of media dollars with all of the data targeting in the whole world available to him at his fingertips, and be able to turn that into some level of success, it just tells me the advertising is not working like it used to, and there was all this hubbub around Cambridge Analytica because of a couple of guys in a British pub being overheard, bragging about, work they did on the election. I looked really closely at what they had been doing, and I said, "Oh yeah, every big company in America does this."
Hmm.
Like, like this was not like spy novel stuff. P&G does this to sell you toilet paper. Like it's this is how it's done. And yeah, but the obvious shift, between that election cycle and this election cycle, and frankly, how the two different candidates learned different lessons from it. I mean, we have a president now who does stuff worth talking about, whether it's good or bad. And we had a candidate who lost the election, you know, by trying to kind of follow the traditional media playbook. It seems pretty apparent to me, um, message aside and candidates aside and everything else, that the format shifted.
Yeah. Do you think it's whether we're talking about political campaigns or sort of more traditional marketing campaigns? Do you think it's a kind of an underestimation of what it takes to get people to make a decision and what it takes to cause people to carry out an action? It's not just about you need to move them. You said you need to connect with them emotionally. It's not just about a one-time message.
Well, of course, it depends on the category, right? Because there's high value actions and there's high involvement decisions. You're gonna buy a washing machine once every 10 years. You're gonna, I don't know, buy a water bottle for your kids a couple of times a year. Now that these things seem to be like, I don't know, like Beanie Babies to kids these days. They like collect them. Um, and so it does depend on the decision making cycle. There's a lot of research that's been published recently showing that in any market, doesn't matter if it's a washing machine, a car, or a water bottle, or a bag of lollipops, 5% of your potential customers are quote unquote in market at any time. And 95% are not in market during that time. And so this is one of the arguments against the lower funnel emphasis, is trying to convince the 95% of people who are not in market to buy something is a losing game. They're not in market right now. You can capture the 5% really readily with those lower funnel tactics. And then the 95% is where you need to nurture, you need to create the emotional connection, you need to generate the goodwill. So this is going back to the idea of Diet Coke. Don't just remind us what Diet Coke is, solve problems. If you're solving problems, then the next time I'm looking to buy a soda, I'll feel pretty good about it being Diet Coke
Yeah,
instead of trying to make me buy Diet Coke today.
completely. Again, that's sounds so simple when you say it, but 95% of people are not going to buy right now, and you're pestering them with adverts. One, you're wasting your money, and two, you're actually annoying or pissing them off, to use your your technical terminology.
Mhm. Well, look, this is so. By the way, let's just for 1 second, let's pause on the technical terminology here and with the
Yeah.
pissing people off, because it is actually it has been a progression over time. Our awareness of brand advertising is at an all-time high. People know when they're being advertised to. Right. There used to be the government had to run studies and evaluate whether people knew the difference between an ad versus, like an editorial spot or whatever. Like we know what ads are now, right? And we're highly aware of the prevalence of brands and companies in our lives today. It's why we have such high expectations of them, right?
Mm.
We kind of gave up on government and now we're expecting companies to solve a lot of problems for us. But in the process, we went from sort of ad annoyance to ad avoidance, and that's where you had ad blockers. You had people who just mute the TV and turn their attention elsewhere during the commercials, and you had ad avoidance, right? Then you just have this like we've gotten to the point where we're paying money, right, to actually turn ads off. Like if people are willing to spend $20 a month to never see your ad, that's a pretty big message,
Mm.
especially if your product's only $10,
Mm.
right? Like it's a pretty big message. And then on the other side, it's now people are actually irritated. It's like if you have found a way to get your stupid ad in front of me after all of my ad avoidance techniques and all the money I'm spending to not see this ad, and you somehow manage to sneak one into the middle of this YouTube video, you're literally pissing people off, right? So it's a progression over the last, call it, decade. And yes, that is where we're at now.
And you could spend that time and energy doing something meaningful that you then have the right to talk
Exactly.
about. For execs that are listening to this who don't necessarily come from a marketing background necessarily, obviously have marketing teams, are very aware of its importance. What are the right questions that they should be asking their CMO, their marketing teams?
How should I measure your success and on what timeline? I think that should be a collaboration because it's going to be different in each sector. In whether you're a mature brand, you're a new brand, you're launching a new product, or you're, doing your best to make the most out of an existing product. You're the market leader, the challenger. It's going to be different in all these cases. But having an honest, open conversation about how should I measure your success and on what timeline, I think would be probably the first place to start. And if you feel like they're giving you the answer that they think you want, like, oh, sales, because they know they're supposed to say sales, then you say, I believe marketing should have a more holistic impact on the business. Can we talk about what that should look like?
Mm.
Because I think that it's you get what you measure kind of thing. I really think if you set the right expectations in the scorecard, then everything will flow from there, and you'll sort of give them the you'll give them the permission to have conversations about building overall value for the business instead of just trying to juice the numbers.
And it's not just about external perception. I find with marketing, actually internal perception is vitally important. I know, like when I've been involved in, say, trying to turn around an underperforming team, first thing I was looking at was not sort of training or incentives. It was, are these people proud to be here? Are they engaged by what we do?
Yep, 100%. I mean, that's a great way of putting it. And when you show people a brand new commercial about your product, they'll clap because they're supposed to,
Mm.
but they don't care about your commercial.
Mm.
If you show them that you're having an impact in the communities they operate in, if you show them that you've come up with a novel way of innovating on the product, if you show them that um, you're doing something that all their key customers are going to be excited about, they're like, I can't wait to text the buyer at our top retailer. He's going to be so excited when he sees we did this thing. You know, that's the kind of stuff that generates real belief
Mm.
and real energy, right? So one of my favorite, I went to business school, I got my MBA, and now every person who asks me if they should do it, I tell them no, it's a complete waste of time and money. But the thing that I took away from my leadership development course there is one thing. It says the definition of leadership is about managing energy, first in yourself and then in those around you. And I really believe in that. And if you believe in managing energy in your team and infusing energy into your team, then giving them things to talk about is how you do that. Where they go home and they're proud at Thanksgiving to be like, look at the thing we did, or they get the video and they want to forward it to their friends from high school, like that's the energy that then they're going to go the extra mile no matter what that job is, no matter what their role is on the team. You've done a thing that got them excited too.
We talked about the sea change we've seen over the last, I think, even few years. Be a bit cruel to you here. Let's fast forward 5 years. What will the best brands be doing differently, do you think?
Well, I think there's going to be a really interesting shift in, I'm sorry to use the most obvious example here, but the role of AI. And then a really interesting shift in what's done in house versus with partners and agencies. And so let's take those two, separately. Actually, I'll start with the second one. Is For many, many years, especially at big companies, the internal marketing teams did not do work. They managed agencies that did work.
Mm.
And they had lots of them. And when I say agencies, not just an advertising agency, they have partners that do the packaging and partners that do the shopper marketing and partners they've got lots of partners that they have to manage. But their role was much more project management and sort of organizing, while the partners each did the work. And that has changed dramatically in the last couple of years and is going to keep accelerating, where the in-house teams are going to do more work. And part of that is startup culture, right? The Californication of marketing is, in startups, you don't rely nearly as much on outside partners. You do a lot more in-house. Um, Part of it is Google, Meta, et al. Let the genie out of the bottle. You don't need an agency now to buy ad spots. It used to be like there were only a handful of companies that owned all of the ad inventory. They bought it all from NBC, right?
Mm.
That doesn't exist anymore. Anybody can now buy the ad inventory at any time.
Yeah.
And so all of the tools and the platforms and the access has been democratized. And the big companies are realizing, actually, a lot of our agencies were getting massive arbitrage on the media buying. Why don't we bring that in house? And then they're realizing, um, the influencers we're working with would much rather be talking directly with the people at the brand instead of through an intermediary. Why don't we bring that in house? And then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So a lot of stuff is coming in house. And so the partners that they work with need to be people who are able to come up with unique, differentiated ideas that you're not going to see if you're in house, because they're going to bring a lot of that in house. And then the second, big shift is going to be the use of AI. Um, I'm a little bit cynical about how every agency is out there right now just talking about what's possible with AI. And of course, Prompt, is an AI agency, right? It is built into the DNA of the company. We've um, made a major commitment to not building technology. Well, we build stuff, but that's not what we're here to do, right? Like Microsoft is going to win the AI race. We're not here to compete with them on that. We're here to be the very best at applying it to do more with less faster. And if you think about a world where a lot more is being insourced, brought into companies, and now AI can automate a lot of menial tasks, accelerate a lot of workflow, and augment a lot of production. Um, Agencies that are built on scalable human resources, rate cards where you just stack up the account executives and the directors and the VPs, and they're all billing their hourly billings, and there's no incentive to do things faster or with less. I just think that that business model is going to rapidly come to a close. And, so what we're going to see in 5 years is it won't be dead yet, but it will be clearly on its way in the direction of project based pricing, outcome based pricing, getting work done at speed, rather than these long planning cycles, where you're planning for 12 to 18 months at a time. Like, no, it's going to be get work in market, see how people react, fine tune, do it again, do it again, do it again. Because AI isn't going to just give us all 3-day work weeks. It's going to raise the expectation of how much work we can do on any timeline.
What about the creative side of all this when it comes to AI? Do you expect AI to disrupt the kind of ideation part of what we're talking about?
I mean, disrupt it, sure, maybe. I think the words that I like, I think it's going to accelerate and augment.
Hmm.
Um, I look at it like Google. If in 2003 to 2007, if you were really good at Googling, it was a huge advantage. Like people just weren't that good at Googling,
It's true.
you know.
It's true.
uh,
It's, ridiculous to say that, but
yeah.
it's very true. Yeah.
And so if you were trying to come up with ideas, like if you're just really good at Googling, like you were better at coming up with ideas. And look, AI is going to have a similar impact. It's just going to augment and accelerate our ability to come up with really interesting ideas, and it already is, to be honest. So, um, yeah, I think it'll disrupt in the sense of anything that's obvious will just be dead on arrival because everybody got the same answer.
That's interesting. When I just reflect on your comment about people not being good at Googling, when I think about the best people and the most senior people I work with, they're really good at Googling,
Yeah.
actually.
It's being resourceful. And there is actually an art to, do you have enough context, enough sort of wisdom, if you will, and
Yeah.
experience to know what to look for, where to look for it, and how to sift through it to determine what's good, or what's an
Yeah.
interesting finding. And the best strategists, in the world, this is how they operate too. Is it's sort of like if I was to send 20 people into a stream, to sift for gold, the one that's a gemologist is the most likely to come back with gold, right? So there is a role for experience, wisdom, and the ability to identify what's a good insight or what's a good idea or whatever. And a lot of that is born out of experience, but some of it's also born out of intuition, just applied to different data sets. But the AI is just going to give us more to work with.
For you personally, clearly this is a topic you're incredibly passionate about, something you've sort of dedicating your life to. You wrote the very successful book that we've referenced multiple times. What's your bigger mission? What's your personal mission?
I mean, this is it. Helping companies wean themselves off advertising dependency. I genuinely believe advertising has become a net negative influence in society,
Mm.
whether it's constantly interrupting us, or reinforcing negative stereotypes, or siphoning resources from companies that should have been spent on giving us better products and services and experiences, and instead, siphoning them into ad inventory. And it's become a leech on society. And I believe that we will be better off with less advertising in our lives. And so the mission is to help big companies wean themselves off advertising dependency.
Yeah. I often think I've heard some stats around particularly luxury brands, and if you buy a Rolex watch, something like 60 or 70% of that price has just been spent on advertising it to me to make it seem so special.
Yes. Right. All that money was spent advertising to somebody who can never afford it so that they
Yeah.
can gawk at the person who can afford it.
Yeah. If someone listening to this takes one action this week to refine their marketing, what should it be?
I mean, like I said, I think they should have an honest and open conversation with their marketing leadership around: are you being measured in the right way? What do you think about this idea of earned marketing? And what are we doing that has nothing to do with our media plan? Can we talk about marketing as if we had no ad spend? Take it off the table 100%. And tell me, what would you do to build this business if you had no media spend? And let's brainstorm that. Let's meet about that. Let's bring people in. Let's talk to customer service. Let's talk to, all our top sales reps. Like, how would you build this business if we had no media spend? Then we can come back and be like, oh, look, we have media spend, right? But we've come up with ideas now that didn't require it.
We'll move now into the rapid fire round.
Okay.
So first thing that comes to mind, biggest buzzword in marketing you'd happily never hear again.
Oh, there's so many. I got to go with working media, right? Or working dollars. There's this idea in advertising or in marketing that the money that you put into advertising spend, like the money that goes to NBC to buy your TV commercial spot, or the money that goes to Meta, or that money is working. And then all the other money that made the ad or that, did the stunt or like whatever, that's all non-working dollars. And all this is a complete fallacy that was generated by procurement professionals at P&G, sort of in cahoots with the big media agencies decades ago, and still being applied today. And so this working versus non-working dollars, I would just never hear that again.
Best leadership advice you've ever received?
Best leadership advice I've ever received. Yeah, I think I'll go back to the definition I gave a minute ago. It's about infusing energy specifically, right? Is your job is to infuse energy into people and situations, and that if you're able to do that, not in a manic way, in a controlled and directed way, that people will follow, and that is leadership.
One business tool or app that you can't live without?
I hate to say, but it's ChatGPT. Yeah, it's gotten it's so good. And we've got all kinds of different GPTs, but ChatGPT is so good.
In a parallel universe, if you weren't doing this, if a few things, we all have those sort of like fork in the life moments. Some of those would have gone in slightly different ways. What else would you be doing, do you think?
Well, there was a period where I was a very serious soccer player and thought about going pro, and ended up getting off of that path. But I'd probably still be doing something in the building the sort of soccer brand in the United States, and bringing soccer to the United States and that kind of thing.
Yeah, okay. Who's your team?
Well, they're not in the United States, but I'm an Arsenal fan.
Oh,
that hurt.
A little bit.
I grew up in Iowa. In Iowa, you could only see Manchester United or Arsenal.
Oh.
And to be honest, there's nothing in planet Earth that will ever take me to Manchester. So yeah. I was like, well, at least I'll go to London and I can go watch this team.
That's fair. And now that's looking like a smart choice. So well done.
Yep.
Fantastic. Paul, it's been a pleasure. I've personally learned so much today, and I'm sure the audience will have done the same. And I think you've triggered a lot of important issues for people to consider and think about. So thank you very much for your time today.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it, and I appreciate you having me on.